When I asked about the date of my son's wedding, my daughter-in-law looked me right in the eye and said, "We got married yesterday, just for special people." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. I stood there holding a box of my late wife's handmade ceramics, realizing I was not considered special. A week later, she called screaming that the rent was overdue and asking if I had transferred it yet. I replied, "Didn't I tell you?" She asked what. I said, "Didn't I tell you that I own the building?" Before I continue this story of how I taught my ungrateful children a lesson they will never forget, where you are watching from, in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who mistook your kindness for weakness. My name is Bill Carter. I am 67 years old, a retired structural engineer who believes that a man's worth is measured by the calluses on his hands and the integrity of his word, not the brand on his shirt. I live in a modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs of Chicago, driving the same Ford F-150 I have owned since the 90s. To my son Daniel and his wife Brittany, I am just an old man who is out of touch with their modern high society aspirations. They see my faded flannel shirts and my adherence to a budget, and they assume I am barely scraping by. They have no idea that the skyline of this city is dotted with buildings I helped design, or that my retirement portfolio is managed by a private wealth firm that requires a 7-figure minimum buy-in. I never told them about the money because I wanted Daniel to build his own character. I wanted him to value hard work. God, I was so blind. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I drove into the city. The bed of my truck rattled as I navigated the potholes on Wacker Drive, heading toward the shimmering glass tower where Daniel and Brittany lived. I paid their rent. $4,500 a month for a penthouse view of the lake. I told them it was a temporary engagement gift to help them get on their feet for the first 2 years. That was 18 months ago. They have never offered to pay a dime, not for the rent, not for the utilities, not even for the parking spot my truck was currently too large to fit into. I parked on the street, feeding quarters into the meter, and carefully lifted a heavy cardboard box from the passenger seat. Inside was something more valuable to me than any check I could write. It was a complete dinner set of hand-glazed ceramic plates and bowls that my late wife Martha had made in her studio during the last year of her life. The glaze was a deep oceanic blue, her favorite color. We had eaten our last Christmas dinner on these plates. I wanted Daniel to have them. I thought it would be a perfect wedding gift, something to bring a piece of his mother into his new marriage. The doorman, a young man named Hector, who I always tipped well during the holidays, held the glass door open for me with a pitying smile. He knew who I was. He also knew how Brittany treated me. "Good luck up there, Mr. Carter," he whispered as I passed. I thanked him and took the elevator to the 42nd floor. My reflection in the polished brass doors showed a man with gray hair and weary eyes clutching a cardboard box like a delivery driver. When I knocked on the heavy oak door of apartment 42B, it took a long time for anyone to answer. Finally, the door swung open. Brittany stood there. She was dressed in a white silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked at me, then at the box in my arms, and her lip curled in immediate distaste. "Oh, it's you," she said, not stepping aside to let me in. "We are actually really busy, Bill. We are packing." I forced a smile, shifting the weight of the box. "Hello to you too, Brittany. Is Daniel home? I brought you two something. It is an early wedding gift." She sighed a loud theatrical exhale that signaled I was wasting her precious time. "Daniel," she yelled over her shoulder, "your dad is here." She turned back to me, eyeing the box. "What is in there?" "It looks dirty." "It is not dirty," I said, feeling a spike of defensiveness. "It is Martha's pottery. The blue set. You know, the one she made before she passed. I thought you would like to have it for your new home. It is a family heirloom." Daniel appeared in the hallway behind her. He was wearing designer sweatpants and looking at his phone. He barely glanced up. Hey, Dad. What's going on? I extended the box toward them. I brought Mom's dishes. For the wedding. Brittany did not reach out to take it. She actually took a step back as if the box contained radioactive waste. "Oh, Bill, that is sweet in a rustic kind of way," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "But we are going for a very specific aesthetic in this apartment. Minimalist, beige, cream, that heavy dark blue stuff. It would just clash with everything. We really do not have space for clutter." Clutter. She called Martha's masterpiece clutter. My hands tightened on the cardboard. "Daniel," I said, looking at my son, "this is your mother's work. She wanted you to have this." Daniel scratched the back of his neck, looking anywhere but at me. "Yeah, Dad. Look, Brittany is really particular about the decor. Maybe you should just keep it at your place. We don't really do the whole handmade pottery thing. It is a little dated." The rejection stung more than a physical slap. I lowered the box. "Okay," I said, my voice quiet. "I understand. I will take it back," Great Brittany said, already starting to close the door. "Was that all? Because like I said, we are super busy." "Wait," I said, putting my hand out to stop the door. "Actually, there was one more thing. I wanted to talk about the wedding date. You two have been engaged for 2 years. I need to know when to book the venue. I have some savings set aside for the reception, and I need to coordinate with the caterers." Brittany and Daniel exchanged a look. It was a look of shared conspiracy, a secret language of smirks and raised eyebrows. Brittany let out a short, sharp laugh. "Oh, Bill," she said, "you do not need to worry about booking anything." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "We got married yesterday," she said. The world seemed to stop spinning for a second. The hallway, the expensive sconces on the walls, the silk of her robe, it all blurred. Yesterday, yep, she popped the P on the word, sounding incredibly pleased with herself. In Napa Valley. It was gorgeous. Just a sunset ceremony among the vines. Very exclusive. Very chic. I looked at Daniel. He was studying his fingernails. You got married?" "Without me, Dad." "Come on," Daniel said, finally looking up, though his eyes were cold. "It was a destination thing. Very small." "But I am your father," I whispered. Brittany stepped forward, her hand on the doorframe, effectively blocking my entry. "Look, Bill, let's be real. We only invited special people. People who fit the vibe. We are trying to build a brand here. My Instagram following is growing, and we needed the photos to look a certain way." I blinked, trying to process the cruelty. "A certain way?" She gestured vaguely at my outfit, at my worn-out boots, at the box of rejected pottery in my arms. "You know, elegant, high-end. Having you there arriving in that beat-up truck wearing one of your flannel shirts. It just would not have worked. It would have ruined the aesthetic. We wanted a luxury experience." I looked at my son, the boy I had taught to fish, the boy I had sat up with when he had fevers, the boy whose college tuition I had paid in full so he would graduate debt-free. "Daniel," I said, "is that how you feel, that I am an embarrassment?" Daniel shrugged, a gesture of cowardice that broke my heart more than his wife's words. "It was Brittany's day, Dad. She wanted it perfect. You know how you get. You would have wanted to talk to everyone, tell your old stories. It just wasn't that kind of party." The pain in my chest was a physical weight, heavy and suffocating. I nodded slowly. "I see. Special people only." "Exactly," Brittany said, beaming as if I had finally solved a complex math problem. "I am glad you understand. Anyway, we have a flight to catch. We are going to the Maldives for 2 weeks." Honeymoon, she started to close the door again. I stood there, paralyzed. Then just before the latch clicked, she opened it a crack. "Oh, and Bill, the rent is due on the 1st. Don't forget to transfer it while we are gone. We do not want to come back to an eviction notice. That would be so embarrassing. The door slammed shut. I heard the lock turn. I stood alone in the hallway for a long time. I looked down at the box in my arms. The blue glaze of the plates was hidden inside, safe from their judgment. I turned around and walked back to the elevator. I did not cry. I did not scream. A cold, hard numbness was spreading through my veins, replacing the warmth of the father I used to be. The drive home was a blur. I do not remember the traffic. I do not remember the sunset. I only remember the silence in the cab of my truck. When I got back to my house, the house Daniel grew up in, it felt empty. I placed the box of ceramics gently on the kitchen table. I sat down and pulled out my phone. I have a fake Instagram account. I created it a year ago because Brittany blocked my real profile. She said my comments on her posts were too cringe. She didn't want her followers seeing a profile picture of a guy holding a fish interacting with her fashion content. So I became user 4592, a silent observer of my son's life. I opened the app and searched for her handle. There it was. The first post. Just married, the happiest day of my life with my soulmate. I swiped through the photos. The venue was breathtaking. A private vineyard estate. The flowers alone must have cost $10,000. There was Daniel looking handsome in a tuxedo I did not buy him. And there was Brittany looking like a princess. But it was the third photo that made my blood run cold. It was a picture of the head table. Sitting in the seats of honor right next to the bride and groom were Brittany's parents, Robert and Susan Miller. They were holding crystal champagne flutes, laughing. The caption read, "So blessed to celebrate with the only family that matters. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for being our rock." The Millers. I knew them. They were flashy people. They drove leased luxury cars and lived in a rented mansion. They had never contributed a cent to Daniel's life. When Daniel and Brittany moved into the penthouse, I was the one who put down the security deposit. I was the one paying the rent. I was the one who bought the furniture they were currently sitting on. But the Millers were the ones in the photo. They were the special people. I was the wallet. I put the phone down on the table. My hand was shaking, not from sadness anymore, but from a rage that was cold and precise. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope I had been carrying. Inside was a check for $50,000. It was meant to be their wedding gift, a down payment for a house of their own so they could stop renting. I looked at the check. I looked at the name Daniel Carter written in my careful handwriting. I picked up the check and slowly, deliberately tore it in half. Then I tore the halves into quarters. I dropped the confetti of paper into the trash can. I stood up and walked to my home office. In the corner stood a heavy steel safe. I spun the dial right to 24 left to 10 right to 5. The heavy door swung open. Inside were stacks of documents, deeds, and certificates. I thumbed through the files until I found a blue folder labeled Carter Holdings, LLC. I pulled it out and opened it. On the very top was the lease agreement for the penthouse at 400 North Lake Shore Drive. You see, Daniel and Brittany think I pay their rent to a landlord named Mr. Henderson. They think Mr. Henderson is a grumpy old investor who lives in Florida. They have never met him. All their communications go through a property management firm. They don't know that Carter Holdings LLC is a shell company. They don't know that I, sole proprietor. They don't know that Mr. Henderson doesn't exist. I bought that unit 3 years ago as an investment. When Daniel said he wanted to live there, I set up the lease so I could subsidize his life without him knowing the extent of my wealth. I wanted to protect him. I wanted to help him. I looked at the signature on the lease, Daniel Carter, and below it the guarantor signature, William Carter. I am not just their father. I am not just their ATM. I am their landlord. And the lease has a very specific clause on page 14 regarding conduct and respect for the property owner. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not called in months. It rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. Mitchell and Associates Legal Department. Hello, Mitchell, I said. My voice was steady. It is Bill Carter. Bill Mitchell's tone warmed instantly. To what do I owe the pleasure? We weren't expecting to hear from you until the quarterly review. I need you to prepare some paperwork for me, Mitchell. Of course. What are we looking at, a new acquisition? No, I said, looking at the torn pieces of the $50,000 check in the trash. I want to execute a termination of tenancy. Mitchell paused. For which property, Unit 42B, the penthouse? There was a silence on the other end. Mitchell knew who lived there, Bill. Are you sure that is Daniel's apartment? I am sure, I said. Also, I want you to calculate the total amount of rent I have subsidized over the last 18 months. Prepare a demand letter for back payment. Bill, this is drastic. Did something happen? They got married yesterday, Mitchell. Oh. Well, congratulations are in order then, no. I said, closing the file folder with a snap. No congratulations. They didn't invite me. I wasn't special enough. But they did invite me to pay their rent next week. I see, Mitchell said, his voice dropping to a professional, shark-like tone. So the free ride is over. The free ride is over, I confirmed. And Mitchell, yes, Bill, send the eviction notice by courier. I want it waiting for them when they get back from the Maldives, and freeze the supplementary credit card I gave Daniel for emergencies. Consider it done. I hung up the phone. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the window panes. I sat there in the silence of my empty house, staring at the blue ceramic bowl on the table. They wanted an aesthetic. They wanted a brand. They wanted to live in a world where image is everything and substance is nothing. Fine. I will give them a reality check. They are about to find out that the man in the flannel shirt owns the roof over their heads, and the rent is past due. The week following the wedding that I was not invited to was strangely quiet. I spent most of it at a small cabin I own near Lake Geneva, about 2 hours north of the city. I turned off my main phone. I sat on the wooden dock with my fishing rod, watching the ripples on the water, trying to wash away the humiliation of standing in that hallway with a box of rejected pottery. The silence of the lake was healing, but it was a fragile piece. Deep down, I knew the storm was not over. It was just gathering strength. I knew my son and his new wife well enough to know that silence from them did not mean independence. It meant they were busy consuming. Exactly 7 days after they slammed the door in my face, I drove back to the suburbs. I parked my truck in the driveway and walked into my kitchen. The red light on my landline was blinking furiously. 12 missed messages, but before I could even press the play button, my cell phone, which I had just turned back on, began to vibrate in my pocket. The screen lit up with a picture of a golden retriever. That was the contact photo for Brittany. She liked dogs more than she liked people, and she certainly treated them better. I stared at the screen for a moment. My thumb hovered over the decline button. A part of me, the part that was still a father who remembered teaching his son to ride a bike, wanted to believe they were calling to apologize. Maybe the Maldives had given them perspective. Maybe they realized that excluding a father from his only son's wedding was a cruelty that needed to be atoned for. I slid my finger across the screen and answered. Hello, I said. My voice was calm, steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. There was no greeting, no hello, no, how are you, Dad? There was only the sharp, high-pitched tone of a woman who is used to getting exactly what she wants, exactly when she wants it. Bill, finally. Brittany snapped. Her voice crackled with irritation. Do you have any idea how many times we have tried to call you? Where have you been? We have been standing at baggage claim for 20 minutes, and my data roaming is costing a fortune. I stood in my kitchen looking at the empty spot on the table where I used to eat breakfast with my wife. I have been away, Brittany, I said. I needed some time. Time for what she cut me off. Look, never mind. We have a crisis here and you are literally the only person who can fix it because it is your mess. My mess. I almost laughed. I leaned against the counter. What seems to be the problem? The problem, she hissed, is that we just got a notification from the building management app. They are claiming the rent wasn't paid on the 1st, and because it is now the 8th, they have slapped on a late fee. A $300 late fee bill. Can you believe the audacity? I closed my eyes. The audacity. Yes, I could believe it. I did not transfer the money, I said simply. The silence on the other end lasted for 3 seconds. Then the explosion came. What do you mean you didn't transfer it? Her voice rose an octave. You always transfer it on the 28th. That is the arrangement. That is the deal. We rely on that schedule. Do you know how embarrassing it is to get a notification like that popping up on my phone while I am trying to show the customs officer my digital passport? It looked like we were broke. I took a deep breath. Brittany, I went to the apartment last week to discuss finances, to discuss the future. You told me you were busy. You told me to leave. Yeah, because we were leaving for our wedding, she screamed. The wedding you were not invited to because you refused to upgrade your lifestyle to match ours. That does not mean you get to just stop paying the bills. You promised to support Daniel for the first 2 years. We are only 18 months in. You cannot just breach a verbal contract because your feelings are hurt. That is so unprofessional. Unprofessional. She was speaking to her father-in-law as if I were a vendor who had failed to deliver a catering order. I waited for her to stop to breathe. Is Daniel there? I asked. He is getting the bags, she said dismissively. And he is freaking out, by the way. He is worried that this late notice is going to hit his credit score. You know we are planning to buy a vacation home next year. We need his credit to be pristine. If this mismanagement of yours dings his score bill, I swear to God, it is going to be unforgivable. I looked at the calendar on my wall. It was marked with the dates of their birthdays, their anniversaries, the days I needed to transfer money. For years, my life had revolved around their schedule. So let me get this straight, I said, keeping my voice low. You returned from a 2-week luxury vacation in the Maldives, a trip that likely cost upwards of $20,000, and you are calling me from the airport not to ask how I am, not to explain why I was excluded from the most important day of your lives, but to demand $4,800. Brittany sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. Oh my God, are we really doing this right now? Are you really going to hold money hostage for emotional leverage? That is so toxic, Bill. Yes, the trip was expensive. That is why we need you to pay the rent. That is how budgeting works. We allocate our funds to lifestyle and networking, and you cover the base expenses. That was the agreement. You wanted to help Daniel get on his feet. Well, standing on his own feet means maintaining a certain image. She paused, and then her voice took on a wheedling, manipulative tone that was even worse than the anger. Look, Bill, I get it. You are lonely. You are acting out. But don't punish Daniel for it. He loves you. He really does. But he is a man now. He has a wife. He has responsibilities. If you want to be part of our lives, if you want to be a grandfather someday, you need to show us that you can be reliable. You need to show us that you support this family. The mention of a future grandchild hit me hard. It was a low blow, a calculated strike. She was dangling the prospect of a relationship with an unborn child as bait to extract cash. How much is the total? I asked. $4,500 for the rent, plus the $300 late fee, she said instantly. The number was on the tip of her tongue. So $4,800. And honestly, you should probably add another $200 for the distress caused. Call it $5,000 even. Just wire it now. Instant transfer. I want to see the zero balance notification before we get in the Uber. I listened to the background noise on her end. I could hear the announcements over the airport PA system. I could hear Daniel's voice in the distance, complaining about a luggage carousel. They were a team united in their entitlement. And if I don't, I asked. Brittany laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. If you don't, then I guess we will have to call my parents. And everyone will know that Daniel's father is a deadbeat who let his son get an eviction warning just to make a point. Is that the reputation you want, Bill? Do you want everyone in our circle to know you are broke and bitter broke? The irony was so thick I could taste it. The woman threatening me was standing in an airport in a tracksuit that cost more than my first car, demanding money from a man who could buy the entire airline she just flew on. Okay, I said. Okay, she sounded suspicious. Okay, you are sending it, I said. Okay, I heard you, I replied. Good. Do it now. We are walking to the curb. I expect it to be handled by the time we get home. Do not make me call you again, Bill. I am jet-lagged, and I have zero patience for games. The line went dead. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't say thank you. She just hung up, confident that her threat had worked. Confident that the old man would scramble to his banking app, terrified of losing his connection to his son. I lowered the phone from my ear. The kitchen was silent again. But the peace was gone. In its place was a clarity so sharp it cut like a diamond. She called it a verbal contract. She called it an agreement. She was right about one thing. Relationships are a contract. They are an exchange of respect, love, and support. When one party stops delivering respect and love, the contract is void. I looked at the phone in my hand. I opened my contacts list. I scrolled past Daniel. I scrolled past the blocked number for Brittany. I stopped at the name Mitchell. I did not open my banking app. I did not initiate a wire transfer for $5,000. Instead, I pressed the call button for my lawyer. Brittany wanted a notification. She wanted to see that the situation had been handled. She wanted to know that the owner of the building was involved. Well, she was going to get exactly what she asked for. Hello, Mitchell, I said when he answered on the first ring. Bill, good to hear from you. Mitchell's voice was professional, sharp. Did you have a change of heart? No, I said. I had a confirmation. Proceed with the plan. Send the notice. You mean the eviction notice? Mitchell asked to clarify. No, I said, looking at the empty chair across the table. Not just the eviction. Send the full demand for arrears. And Mitchell, make sure the process server meets them at the door. I want the paperwork to be the first thing they see when they walk into that penthouse. Understood, Mitchell said. Consider it done. I hung up the phone. I walked over to the coffee maker and started a fresh pot. My hands were steady. My heart was calm. The sad, lonely father who stood in the hallway with a box of dishes was gone. In his place was the businessman who had built a fortune from concrete and steel. They wanted the landlord. They just got him. The phone rang again, barely 10 minutes later. I was still standing in the kitchen, the warmth of the coffee mug seeping into my cold hands. I knew who it was before I even looked at the screen. They were checking their banking app. They were refreshing the balance, expecting to see the magic number that would solve all their problems and validate their lifestyle. When they saw 0, they panicked. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted them to sit in that discomfort, to feel the tiny prick of fear that comes when the safety net you have abused for years suddenly disappears. I slid the answer button. I did not say hello. Bill Brittany's voice was no longer just annoyed. It was sharp with disbelief. I just refreshed the account. It is empty. You said you heard me. You said okay. Why is the transfer not pending? The driver is loading the last bag. We are about to leave the terminal. I took a sip of my coffee. It was black, bitter, and grounding. I did say, okay, Brittany. I replied, my voice calm, almost conversational. I said okay because I understood your position perfectly. You made it very clear at the wedding. You and Daniel have moved into a different social stratum. You are building a brand. You are surrounding yourselves with special people. What are you talking about? Just send the money, she screamed. The veneer of sophistication was cracking. I could hear the desperation underneath. I walked over to the window and looked out at my driveway, at the old Ford truck they despised so much. I am talking about consistency, Brittany. You humiliated me because I did not fit your image of success. You told me I was not class enough to be seen in your wedding photos. Well, I have been thinking about that, and I realized you were right. I paused for effect. The silence on the other end was heavy with confusion and rising anger. I continued. A man who drives a 20-year-old truck and wears flannel shirts probably shouldn't be financing the lives of the elite. It sends the wrong message. After all, high-class people pay their own rent, don't they? The explosion was immediate. It was not just anger. It was the vitriol of someone who has been exposed. You old miserable son of a bitch, Brittany shrieked. Her voice was so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Is that what this is? You are jealous. You are trying to sabotage us because we have a life you could never dream of. You are pathetic. You are a lonely, bitter old man holding on to his little retirement savings like it makes him powerful. You have no idea how the world works. Give me the phone. It was Daniel's voice, rough, impatient. There was a fumbling sound, the rustle of fabric, and then my son was on the line. Dad. Stop it. Daniel snapped. He didn't sound like my son anymore. He sounded like a stranger who was inconvenienced by a slow waiter. You are embarrassing yourself. Brittany is crying. Are you happy? Is that what you wanted to ruin our homecoming? I am not trying to ruin anything, Daniel, I said. I am simply stepping back. You wanted independence. You wanted to be the man of the house. I am giving you that opportunity. Don't give me that philosophical garbage, he spat. This isn't about independence. This is about you being petty. You are calculating every dime, keeping score like a small-minded shopkeeper. You promised to help us. You gave your word. And now the moment your feelings get a little hurt, you pull the rug out. That is low, Dad. That is really low. Even for you. Calculated, petty, small. The words hit me like stones, but they didn't break skin. They just bounced off the armor I had forged over the last week. I paid for your college, Daniel, I said softly. I paid for your car. I paid for the engagement ring on your wife's finger. I have paid your rent for 18 months. If that is your definition of petty, then you need a dictionary. That is exactly what I mean, Daniel shouted. You throw money at us, and then you think you own us. You think buying me a car gives you the right to show up at my apartment, looking like a gardener and demanding attention. You think paying rent means we have to invite you to an exclusive event where you clearly don't belong. You are transactional. Dad, you don't understand love. You only understand control. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. The accusation was so twisted, so backwards, it almost made me dizzy. I had hidden my wealth specifically to avoid this. I had hidden it so he would love me, not for what I could buy him. And yet here we were. I understand enough, I said. I understand that you are 28 years old, Daniel. When I was 28, I had already bought this house. I was working 14 hours a day. I didn't blame my father for my bills. Times are different, he yelled. God, you are so out of touch. You have no idea how hard it is for us. We have image maintenance. We have networking costs. We are building a future, and you are sitting there on your pile of cash judging us. You are being selfish. That is what you are. A selfish, jealous old man who can't stand seeing his son succeed. Succeed, I asked. Daniel. You are begging your father for rent money while standing on the curb at O'Hare Airport. That is not success. That is dependency." There was a silence on the line, a heavy breathing silence. Then Daniel's voice dropped, becoming colder, more menacing. "Fine," he said. "If that is how you want to play it. Keep your money. Keep your little power trip. But listen to me closely, Dad. If that transfer isn't in my account by tonight, do not expect to see us at Christmas. Do not expect us for Thanksgiving. And you know we have been talking about having kids soon. Well, you can forget about that. You will never see your grandchildren. I will not let a petty, vindictive man near my children. You will die alone in that empty house, and it will be your own fault." The threat hung in the air, the ultimate weapon. He was weaponizing my future lineage, holding my unborn grandchildren hostage for a check. My heart didn't break. It calcified. It turned into something hard and unbreakable, like the steel beams I used to inspect. "Is that a promise, Daniel?" I asked. "It is a guarantee," he sneered. "Fix this, or you are dead to us." I looked at the photo of Martha on the fridge. She was smiling, holding Daniel when he was a toddler. That toddler was gone. The man on the phone was a stranger. "I accept your terms," I said. He sounded confused. "I said I accept your terms. I will not be sending the money. And I guess I will not be seeing you for Christmas." "Dad, wait. I didn't mean." His voice faltered, realizing he had pushed too far, or perhaps realizing the bluff hadn't worked. "Goodbye, Daniel," I said. "Good luck with the high-class life." I ended the call. I didn't slam the phone down. I placed it gently on the counter. My hands were not shaking anymore. The silence in the house was no longer lonely. It was peaceful. It was the silence of a decision made, a line drawn in the concrete. I picked up my coffee mug. It was cold now, but I drank it anyway. I had work to do. And for the first time in years, I wasn't working for them. I was working for me. The drive to downtown Chicago was the longest 40 minutes of my life yet. My mind was clearer than it had been in decades. I parked my battered Ford F-150 in the underground garage of the Sterling Tower, a 70-story monolith of steel and glass that dominated the skyline. The valet, a young man named Marcus, who had worked there for 5 years, rushed over. He didn't look at the dented bumper or the rust around the wheel wells. He looked at me with genuine respect. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," he said, opening my door. "We haven't seen you in a while. Shall I have it detailed while you are upstairs?" "No, Marcus. Just keep it close," I said, handing him a $100 bill. "I won't be long. I am just here to sign some papers." I walked to the private elevator bank, bypassing the security desk where visitors were currently queuing up to show their IDs. I placed my palm on the biometric scanner. It beeped green instantly. The doors slid open, and I stepped into the silent, plush interior that smelled of lemon oil and old money. I pressed the button for the penthouse suite. Most people look at me and see a retiree who clips coupons. They see the flannel shirts and the worn-out boots and assume I am living on a fixed pension. Even my own son Daniel looks at me with a mix of pity and embarrassment. He thinks I spent 40 years as a mid-level construction manager, checking boxes and wearing a hard hat. He has no idea that I wasn't just managing the construction sites. I was buying the land they sat on. Carter Holdings began in 1985 with a single duplex I fixed up on weekends. Today, it is one of the largest privately held commercial real estate portfolios in the Midwest. We own office parks, retail centers, and 3 luxury residential towers, including the one Daniel lives in. I built this empire in the shadows, using LLCs and holding companies because I wanted a quiet life. I wanted to come home to Martha and have dinner without the phone ringing off the hook. I wanted my son to grow up normal, not as a trust fund baby who measures his worth by the emblem on his car key. I stepped out of the elevator into the lobby of Mitchell and Associates. The receptionist, a sharp woman named Sarah, stood up immediately. "Mr. Carter," she said, her smile professional and warm. Mr. Mitchell is expecting you in the conference room. He cleared his schedule for the afternoon. Thank you, Sarah. I walked down the hallway lined with abstract art that cost more than the house I lived in. When I entered the corner office, Mitchell was standing by the window looking out at the city. He turned his face serious. He didn't offer me coffee. He knew this wasn't a social visit. He sat down and opened a leather folder. On the table lay a single document. It was the demand for possession. I have drafted it exactly as you asked, Bill Mitchell said, sliding the paper toward me. But I have to ask you one last time. Once we file this, it becomes public record. It will show up on background checks. It will hit his credit report within 30 days. This is the nuclear option. I picked up the pen. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy and cold in my hand. It reminded me of the tools I used to use: wrenches, hammers, things that had weight and consequence. Daniel called me a transactional man, I said, my voice low. He told me I treat relationships like business deals. He said if I didn't pay his rent, I would never see my grandchildren. Mitchell flinched slightly. He did not know that part. That is extreme, he murmured. It is leverage, I corrected him. It is a negotiation tactic. He thinks he is playing hardball with a weak old man. He doesn't realize he is trying to bluff the house. I looked down at the document. It was standard legal boilerplate, cold and impersonal. But then Mitchell pulled out another sheet of paper. Before you sign, Bill, you should see this, Mitchell said. It came in this morning. It was sent to the general inbox of Carter Holdings. It was flagged by my team because of the sender. I took the paper. It was a printout of an email. The sender was Daniel Carter. The subject line read, "Inquiry regarding partnership opportunities." I began to read, and my stomach twisted. To the executive team at Carter Holdings, the email began. My name is Daniel Carter. I am a resident at your North Lake Shore property. I am writing to you today not just as a tenant, but as an admirer. I have followed the trajectory of Carter Holdings for years. Your aggressive acquisition strategy and ruthless efficiency in the market are things I aspire to emulate in my own career. I am currently looking for mentorship and investment for my personal brand. I believe I have the killer instinct that defines your company culture. I would love just 10 minutes of your time to discuss how I can bring my vision to your empire. I put the paper down. I felt sick. He idolizes me, I whispered. He idolizes the shark. But he spits on the father. Mitchell nodded slowly. He doesn't know Carter Holdings is you, Bill. He thinks he is writing to some Wall Street wolf. He is trying to impress the landlord while extorting his dad. The irony was so sharp it could cut glass. Daniel wanted to be a killer. He wanted to be ruthless. He worshipped the very power that I had kept hidden to protect him. He thought kindness was weakness. He thought my modesty was failure. And here he was begging the ruthless corporation for a job while threatening the weak father with emotional blackmail. He wants a lesson in ruthlessness, I asked, looking up at Mitchell. Mitchell adjusted his glasses. Be careful what you wish for, right? I looked back at the eviction notice. I didn't hesitate this time. I pressed the nib of the pen to the paper and signed my name, not Dad, but William J. Carter, President Carter Holdings, LLC. File it, I said. And Mitchell, yes, Bill. Do not just mail it. I want it served. I want a process server in a cheap suit to knock on that mahogany door. I want him to hand it to Brittany while she is doing her makeup. I want it to be physical. I want them to hold the consequence in their hands. Mitchell nodded, making a note on his pad. Done. And regarding the request for a meeting. The email he sent. Reply to it? I said. My voice was hard now, stripped of all sentiment. Tell Mr. Daniel Carter that Carter Holdings has reviewed his portfolio and found it lacking. Tell him that we do not partner with individuals who have a history of financial instability. use his own credit score against him. That is cold, Bill. It is business, I said, standing up. He wants to play in the big leagues. He needs to learn the rules. Rule number 1, never bite the hand that feeds you, especially if you don't know who the hand belongs to. I walked over to the window. From this height, the cars down on the street looked like toys. The people looked like ants. I could see the building where Daniel lived, shimmering in the distance. It was a beautiful building. I had designed the structural supports myself. I knew exactly how much weight it could hold before it collapsed. Daniel was about to find out how much weight he could hold. There is one more thing, Mitchell said, interrupting my thoughts. He pulled a third file from his briefcase. The trust fund. I turned around. The trust fund was the safety net I had set up when Daniel was born. It was set to vest when he turned 30. It contained $2 million. It was legally untouchable, meant to ensure he would never be destitute. What about it? I asked. The clauses are strict, Mitchell said. But there is a morality clause. If the beneficiary engages in conduct that brings disrepute to the family name or demonstrates gross financial negligence, the trustee, that is you, has the power to defer the vesting period. Defer it, I asked, until he is 40 or 50, or never if you choose to dissolve it and donate the principal to charity. I stared at the file. $2 million. That money would solve all his problems. It would buy the vacation home he wanted. It would pay for the nursery. It would validate Brittany's belief that they were special. If I let him have that money in 2 years, he will never learn, I said. He will think he won. He will think that treating people like dirt has no cost because the check always clears in the end. I walked back to the desk and placed my hand on the trust fund file. Freeze it, I commanded. Initiate a review of the beneficiary's conduct. Cite the attempted extortion of his father as a breach of the morality clause. Mitchell actually smiled. A small, grim smile. You are going to break him, Bill. No, Mitchell, I said, buttoning my old flannel jacket. I am going to fix him. A bone has to be broken before it can set straight. Right now, he is crooked. He thinks the world owes him a living. He needs to hit the bottom so he can see where the foundation really is. I walked toward the door. I didn't look back. Let me know when the server makes the drop, I said. I want to know the exact time reality knocks on their door. I took the elevator down to the garage. I got back into my rusted truck. As I drove out into the sunlight, I felt a strange sense of liberation. For years, I had been walking on eggshells, trying not to embarrass them, trying to buy their love with silent subsidies. I was done. I pulled out onto Wacker Drive. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my security system. Motion detected at your front door. I checked the camera feed on my phone. It was a courier. He was delivering a package from the Maldives. A souvenir, perhaps. A peace offering. I zoomed in. It wasn't a gift. It was a bill. A bill for unpaid share of wedding expenses addressed to me. They had actually sent me an invoice for the wedding I wasn't allowed to attend. I laughed. A loud barking laugh that echoed in the cab of the truck. They had no idea what was coming for them. The invoice they just sent was a paper airplane. I had just launched a missile. 3 days later, the hammer fell. It did not fall with a shout or a scream, but with the heavy, authoritative thud of a staple gun against solid oak. I was not there to see it in person, but I didn't need to be. I had the report from the process server, a man named Frank, who had been serving notices for Carter Holdings for 20 years. Frank was efficient. He was terrifyingly polite. He had a body camera. I watched the footage later in my office, sipping lukewarm tea, feeling a mixture of grim satisfaction and deep aching sorrow. It was 11 in the morning on a Tuesday. The hallway of the penthouse floor was quiet, lined with plush carpet that dampened footsteps. But Frank didn't walk softly. He marched up to door 42B with a clipboard in one hand and a roll of neon orange tape in the other. Inside that apartment, a different kind of performance was taking place. I knew this because I had created a burner account to watch Brittany's live stream. She had announced it days in advance. It was titled, "My Morning Routine Secrets of a Seven-Figure Mindset." I had the live stream open on my tablet while I watched Frank's body camera footage on my desktop monitor. The synchronization was perfect. On the tablet, Brittany was standing in the kitchen, my kitchen really wearing a matching beige yoga set that probably cost $300. She had a ring light set up casting a halo in her eyes. She was holding a green smoothie, smiling at the camera lens as hearts and comments floated up the side of the screen. "Guys," she was saying, her voice breathless and airy. "Manifestation is so real. You just have to vibrate at the frequency of abundance. When Daniel and I moved into this penthouse, everyone told us it was too expensive. But we knew we deserved this view. We knew the universe would provide. And look at us now. We are living our dream life because we refused to settle for less." On the desktop monitor, Frank raised his fist and knocked. Bam, bam, bam. On the tablet, Brittany jumped. The green smoothie sloshed over the rim of the glass, staining her manicured hand. She laughed nervously, glancing toward the door. "Oops," she giggled. "Real life happens, right?" "That is probably the concierge. I ordered some organic flowers for the foyer. Hold on, loves, let's see what abundance looks like when it knocks at the door." She picked up the phone she was streaming with, carrying her audience with her as she walked to the door. She was still smiling, still performing. She unlocked the deadbolt and swung the door open. "Hi. You can just leave them by the—" Her voice trailed off. Frank was not holding flowers. He was a large man with a thick neck and a face carved out of granite. He was holding a stack of legal documents. "Brittany Carter?" Frank asked. His voice was loud, booming into the hallway, and more importantly, into the microphone of her phone. Brittany frowned, trying to angle the camera away from him, but in her fluster she actually tilted it down, capturing the clipboard clearly. "Excuse me, I am streaming right now. Who are you?" "I am a process server for the Cook County Circuit Court," Frank stated. He didn't whisper. He didn't apologize. He projected. "I am serving you with a 5-day notice for non-payment of rent and a summons for unlawful detainer." The chat on her live stream went wild. I saw the comments flying by. "Wait, is she being evicted?" "The rent isn't paid. I thought she owned this place." Awkward. Brittany saw the comments too. Her face went from beige to ghost white. "No, you have the wrong apartment," she stammered, trying to shut the door. "We pay our rent. We are owners. I mean, we are getting the deed transferred." "Go away." Frank stuck his foot in the door. It was a classic move. "Ma'am, you are being served. The owner of the building, Carter Holdings LLC, has filed for immediate repossession of the property due to arrears totaling $4,800 and breach of contract." He shoved the papers into her free hand. She dropped her phone. The live stream didn't cut out immediately. The phone landed face up on the floor. The camera was now pointed at the ceiling, but the audio was crystal clear. "You can't do this!" Brittany shrieked, the airy influencer voice gone replaced by the shrill panic of a trapped child. "Get away from my door!" Daniel. The feed cut to black as she finally scrambled to end the broadcast. But the damage was done. 5,000 people had watched the Queen of Abundance get served with an eviction notice. Frank, being a professional, finished the job. He pulled out the orange sticker, the one that screams "eviction," in bold black letters, and smoothed it onto the polished mahogany of the front door. He took a photo for proof of service. Then he walked away. I closed the video player on my computer. I sat in the silence of my office. It was done. The first domino had fallen. 10 minutes later, my phone began to vibrate. It was Daniel. I looked at the screen. I watched the name pulse. I could imagine the scene in the penthouse right now. Brittany, hysterical, crying about her reputation, screaming that her career was ruined. Daniel pacing the floor, terrified, looking at the legal jargon on the papers that threatened to destroy his credit score for the next 7 years. They were realizing that the universe does not provide penthouses. Hard work provides penthouses, and fathers provide penthouses. Until they don't. The phone stopped ringing. Then it started again immediately. This time it was Brittany. I didn't block them yet. I wanted to see the desperation. I wanted to see how many times they would reach out to the man they had discarded. I picked up the phone, but I didn't answer. I swiped down to send a pre-written text message. It was something I had drafted with Mitchell. This number is no longer available for financial emergencies. Please direct all inquiries regarding tenancy to the legal representatives of Carter Holdings listed on the summons. I hit send. Then I went into my settings and tapped block caller for both of them. It felt like cutting off a limb. It was a phantom pain, a deep ache where my instinct to protect them used to be. For 28 years, whenever Daniel cried, I ran to him. When he scraped his knee, I had a bandage. When he crashed his first car, I was there with the insurance paperwork. When he needed tuition, I wrote the check. I had trained him to believe that I was the safety net. I had trained him to believe that no matter how far he fell, I would catch him. But you cannot catch a man who is jumping off a cliff on purpose because he thinks he can fly. You have to let him hit the ground. You have to let gravity teach him the lesson that you failed to teach. I stood up and walked to the window of my office. My reflection in the glass looked older than I felt. I wondered what they were doing now. Were they packing? Were they fighting? Were they calling Brittany's parents? I hoped they were calling the Millers. I really did. Because that was the next phase of the lesson. They were about to find out that the people who drink your champagne at the wedding are rarely the people who help you move boxes in the rain. I put on my coat. I had a meeting with a contractor about a new foundation for a library downtown. Real work. Tangible work. As I walked out of the office, I told Sarah, my assistant, "If anyone calls claiming to be my son, tell them Mr. Carter is in a meeting. Tell them he is busy building something that lasts." I drove past their building on my way to the site. I looked up at the 42nd floor. I couldn't see the orange sticker from the street, of course, but I knew it was there. A scarlet letter on the door of their vanity. I turned the radio up. Classic rock. The kind of music Daniel used to say was for dinosaurs. Well, the dinosaurs survived a lot of things before the meteor hit. Daniel and Brittany were just starting to feel the heat of the atmosphere burning up around them. And I was the one who had lit the fuse. I knew they were coming long before I saw the silver Mercedes SUV turn onto my street. I could feel the vibration of their anger in the air, a disturbance in the quiet afternoon that I had curated for myself. I was out on the front porch applying a fresh coat of white paint to the railing. It was a simple task, repetitive and soothing. The rhythmic slide of the brush against the wood was the only sound I needed. But then the roar of an engine shattered the peace. Daniel drove like he lived fast, aggressive, and without regard for the safety of others. He swerved into my driveway, the tires crunching violently against the gravel I had raked just yesterday. They didn't park. They abandoned the vehicle. The doors flew open before the engine had even fully cut out. Brittany was the first one out. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a tracksuit that looked like it was designed for a runway, not for a confrontation in a suburban front yard. She marched toward the porch, her heels clicking sharply on the concrete path. Daniel trailed behind her, looking less like a husband and more like a bodyguard who was afraid of his client. I didn't stop painting. I dipped the brush into the can, wiped the excess on the rim, and continued my stroke. Brittany screamed. She didn't call me Dad. She hadn't called me Dad in 2 years. "Are you insane? Do you have any idea what you have done?" I finished the section of the railing before I looked up. I placed the brush carefully across the top of the can. I stood up, wiping my hands on a rag. "Hello, Brittany. Hello, Daniel." "Don't you hello me," she shrieked. She was standing at the bottom of the porch steps, now looking up at me. Her face was flushed, her chest heaving. "A process server. You sent a process server to my door while I was live streaming. Do you know I lost 3 brand deals in the last hour? 3. My reputation is in tatters because of your little stunt." I leaned against the pillar of the porch. "It wasn't a stunt, Brittany. It was a legal notification. When tenants fail to pay rent, they receive a notice. That is how the real world works." "Tenants." She spat the word out like it was poison. "We are family. We are your children. You don't evict your children." "You have lost your mind, Bill. Seriously. I have been telling Daniel for months that you are slipping. This proves it. You are senile. You are having some kind of episode." Daniel finally stepped up beside her. He looked tired, but his eyes were hard. "Dad, she is right. This isn't normal behavior. Sending legal papers. Blocking our calls, this is paranoid. It is erratic. We are worried about your mental faculties." I looked at my son. He was parroting her words. He was using the language of concern to mask his greed. "My mental faculties are just fine, Daniel," I said calmly. "No, they are not," Brittany interrupted, waving a manicured hand in my face. "You are forgetting who we are. You are forgetting that we are the only people who will visit you when you are drooling in a nursing home. Or maybe we won't. You know, we were talking about starting a family next year. We were going to make you a grandfather." She paused, letting the words hang there. The ultimate trump card. But now, she laughed a cruel, sharp sound. "You can forget it. I will never let you near my children. If I have a baby, you will be a stranger to them. I will tell them their grandfather died years ago. I will erase you, Bill. You will be nothing but a ghost." The threat was meant to shatter me. She expected me to drop to my knees to beg for forgiveness, to promise anything just for the hope of holding a future grandchild. But she didn't understand something fundamental. A grandfather is a role earned by love, not purchased by submission. And I would not buy my way into a child's life if the price was my dignity. I looked at her, then at Daniel. He didn't flinch at her cruelty. He stood there and let her threaten to erase me. That was the moment the last thread of guilt snapped. I reached down and picked up a black binder I had left on the porch swing. It was heavy, filled with 3 years of bank statements, credit card receipts, and canceled checks. "You think I am senile?" I asked, my voice steady. "You think I am losing my grip on reality?" I opened the binder. I flipped past the first few pages. "Let's look at the reality, Daniel." I held up a page covered in highlighted rows. August 14th, 2020. You crashed your car. The insurance wouldn't cover it because you were driving under the influence of exhaustion, or so you said. I paid $12,000 for the repairs and the legal fees to keep your record clean. I called it a safety investment. I flipped the page. January 3rd, 2021. You wanted to start a dropshipping business. You needed capital. I gave you $15,000. The business folded in 2 months because you spent the marketing budget on a trip to Tulum. I called it an educational investment. Brittany rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, you are bringing up old history. You are so petty." I ignored her. I flipped another page. September 2021. The engagement ring. You wanted the 3-carat diamond because Brittany said anything less was an insult to her beauty. I paid $28,000. I called it a happiness investment. I kept flipping. The sound of the paper turning was the only noise in the yard. The wedding deposits, the honeymoon upgrades, the rent, the furniture, the luxury car lease co-signed by me. I stopped at the last page. At the bottom was a number circled in red ink. $212,450, I read aloud. I looked at Daniel. That is the total amount of money I have poured into the Daniel and Brittany project in the last 36 months. $200,000. That is not parental support, Daniel. That is venture capital. And as a businessman, I have to look at the return on investment. I slammed the binder shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. And what is my return? I asked. What have I gotten back for my investment? I stepped down one stair, bringing me eye level with them. I got a son who lies to me. I got a daughter-in-law who mocks my clothes and my home. I got excluded from the most important day of your lives because I wasn't aesthetic enough. And today I got a threat that my unborn grandchildren will be used as weapons against me. Brittany opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. My voice rose just a fraction, hard as steel. The ROI is negative, Daniel. The project is a failure. And when a project fails, a smart investor doesn't throw good money after bad. He liquidates his assets and he walks away. Daniel's face was pale. Dad, it's not like that. We are just stressed. It is exactly like that, I said. You called me cheap. You called me small. But this binder proves that I have been the biggest investor in your life. And today, the funding round is closed. I tossed the binder onto the swing. The eviction stands. The rent is due. And if you want to save your credit score, I suggest you sell that ring on your finger, Brittany. Because the Bank of Bill is officially bankrupt. Brittany stared at me, her mouth agape. She looked at the binder, then at me, realizing for the first time that I had kept receipts. Not just paper receipts, but emotional ones. You are a monster, she whispered. A cold-hearted monster. No, I said, picking up my paintbrush again. I am just a structural engineer. And I know a weak foundation when I see one. You two are building a life on sand. And the tide just came in. Now get off my property. I have a railing to finish. I turned my back on them. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. My heart was hammering against my ribs, screaming at me to turn around, to hug my son, to fix it. But my mind held firm. I heard Brittany sob. I heard Daniel curse under his breath. I heard the car doors slam. As they reversed out of the driveway, kicking up dust and gravel, I didn't look up. I focused on the white paint. I focused on covering the old weathered wood with something clean and new. They drove away, leaving silence in their wake. But it wasn't the silence of loneliness anymore. It was the silence of a clean slate. I had stated my case. I had shown the numbers. And for the first time in years, the balance sheet of my life was starting to make sense. The debt was theirs now, and they were about to find out just how expensive it is to live in the real world. The silence that followed my declaration was heavy, but it was not the silence of surrender. It was the silence of a bomb taking a deep breath before detonating. I stood on the porch, the paintbrush in my hand, feeling like a weapon, watching Brittany's face cycle through a spectrum of emotions. First, there was shock. Then there was the flicker of genuine fear as the reality of the numbers in the black binder sank in. $200,000 is a number that is hard to argue with. It is a number that screams dependency. But Brittany was not a woman who allowed reality to dictate her narrative. She was a woman who lived in a world of filters and angles where the ugly truth could always be cropped out. She threw her head back and laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound that startled a robin perched on the oak tree in the front yard. You are pathetic, Bill, she spat, her voice dripping with venom. You stand there with your little binder and your little receipts thinking you have trapped us. You think because you paid for a few dinners and a down payment that you own us. That is the difference between you and real wealthy people. You count every penny. You obsess over every dime. It is tacky. It is so incredibly tacky. She stepped closer to the railing, her eyes blazing with a delusion so powerful it was almost impressive. You want to close the bank of Bill Fine. Close it. Burn it down for all I care. Do you honestly think we need you? Do you think we rely on your pittance because we have no other options? I didn't answer. I just watched her perform. We only took your money out of pity, Bill, she continued, gesturing wildly. Daniel wanted to make you feel useful. He wanted to let you feel like a provider because he knows how lonely you are. But we have options. We have resources you cannot even imagine. She turned to Daniel, grabbing his arm and pulling him forward as a prop in her theater of the absurd. Tell him, Daniel. Tell him about my parents. Daniel looked up, his eyes shifting nervously. He swallowed hard. Yeah, Dad. Robert and Susan. They have been offering to help. Offering to help. Brittany cut him off, shrieking. They have been begging to buy us a place. They wanted to buy the penthouse outright months ago. They wanted to pay cash. But we said no. We said no, let's let Bill handle the rent because it makes him feel involved. We were doing you a favor. I looked at Daniel. I wondered if he actually believed this. I wondered if the lie had been repeated so many times between them that it had calcified into a fact in his mind. So Robert Miller is going to buy the penthouse, I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He is going to buy it today, Brittany declared triumphantly. We are going to drive straight to their house right now. We are going to tell them that you have abandoned us. We are going to tell them that you are a cruel, vindictive old man who threw his son to the wolves. And you know what they will do? They will laugh. They will write a check. And they will buy that apartment out from under your cheap little management company. She smirked, crossing her arms over her chest. And when they do, Bill, things are going to change. When my parents own the deed, you will be banned. I will instruct the doorman to never let you in. You will never sit on my sofa again. You will never see the nursery we build. You will never see the life we create. You will be nothing. I looked at the black binder on the swing. I thought about the credit check I had run on Robert Miller a year ago when he tried to co-sign the lease for Daniel's car. The man had a credit score of 520. He had 3 maxed-out credit cards and a lien on his leased Range Rover. Robert Miller couldn't buy a sandwich, let alone a $2 million penthouse. But I didn't say that. I didn't interrupt her fantasy. Because sometimes the best way to destroy a delusion is to let it collide with reality at full speed. That sounds like a solid plan, Brittany, I said. If Robert is ready to write a check, then you have nothing to worry about. You should go. She looked at me, expecting a fight, expecting me to beg. When I didn't, her anger flared again. We are going, she snapped, and don't expect an invitation to the housewarming party. Come on, Daniel, let's go see what real family looks like. Let's go see people who actually love us, not just people who keep score. She spun around on her heel, marching back toward the silver SUV. Daniel lingered for a second. He looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the little boy who used to ask me to check under his bed for monsters. Dad, He started, his voice cracking. Don't, Daniel, I said softly. Just go. Go ask Robert for the money. Go see the truth for yourself. Brittany honked the horn, a long, aggressive blast that tore through the air. Daniel flinched. He turned and jogged back to the car, shrinking with every step. He climbed into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life. Brittany didn't look back. She was already on her phone, probably typing out a furious text message to her mother, preparing the narrative, setting the stage for their triumphant arrival. Daniel slammed the car into reverse. He backed out of my driveway too fast, his tires spinning on the asphalt, leaving black rubber marks on the road I had paved myself 10 years ago. They sped off down the street, disappearing around the corner, heading toward the wealthy enclave where the Millers rented their mansion. I stood on the porch for a long time after the sound of the engine faded. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip lower, casting long shadows across the lawn. They were driving toward a mirage. They were driving toward a safety net that was woven from smoke and lies. Brittany thought she was playing an ace. She thought her parents were the kings and queens of the deck. She had no idea she was holding a handful of jokers. I picked up the black binder and walked inside the house. I placed it back in the safe right next to the file on Robert Miller's financial insolvency. "Go ahead," I whispered to the empty room. "Go ask him." I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. It was the calm of a man who has done his job. I had inspected the structure. I had identified the rot. I had issued the warnings. Now all that was left was to watch the collapse. I went into the kitchen and made myself a sandwich. I ate it standing up, looking out the window. I checked my watch. It was 4 in the afternoon. It would take them 40 minutes to get to the Miller's house. Another 20 minutes for the pleasantries and the wine. By 5:30, the question would be asked. By 5:31, the illusion would shatter. I took a bite of my sandwich. I wasn't hungry, really, but I needed to keep my strength up. The cleanup after a disaster is always the hardest part. And the disaster was about to happen right on schedule. The drive to the Miller estate in Highland Park was probably the most hopeful journey my son had ever taken. I can picture it clearly. Daniel gripping the steering wheel of his leased Mercedes, his knuckles white, telling himself that everything was going to be fine. Brittany in the passenger seat, fixing her makeup in the visor mirror, convincing herself that her parents were the heroes of this story. They were driving away from a father who demanded accountability and speeding toward a fantasy of unconditional wealth. I know the house they were driving to. I had looked up the property records months ago. It is a sprawling Georgian mansion with white pillars and a circular driveway. It looks like old money. It looks like stability. But if you look at the county clerk's website, you will see that the property has been refinanced 3 times in 5 years. You will see that it is currently under a pre-foreclosure warning. But Daniel and Brittany didn't look at county records. They looked at the 3 Range Rovers parked out front and assumed they were safe. They pulled into the driveway just as the sun was beginning to set. The golden light hit the white pillars, making the house glow. To them, it must have looked like salvation. They didn't notice that the landscaping service hadn't been there in weeks, or that the grass was getting a little too long. They only saw the image. They walked up to the front door, not needing to knock because they were family. They walked straight into the foyer, expecting to be greeted with open arms and a checkbook. Robert and Susan Miller were in the drawing room. Robert was wearing a smoking jacket, holding a glass of scotch. Susan was flipping through a magazine. It was a tableau of leisure, a scene from a movie about how the other half lives. "Mom," Dad Brittany announced, dropping her designer bag on the floor with a dramatic thud. "We have a situation, and we need you to fix it immediately." Susan looked up, startled. "Brittany, darling, we weren't expecting you. Is everything all right?" "You look flustered." "It is," Bill Brittany said, throwing herself onto the velvet sofa. "He has lost his mind. He sent a process server to the penthouse. He is trying to evict us over a missed rent payment. Can you believe it? He is treating us like criminals." Robert took a sip of his scotch, his eyes narrowing. "Evict you? That sounds extreme. Even for him. What did you do?" "We didn't do anything," Daniel interjected, stepping into the room. He looked small in that large space standing between the parents he wanted to impress and the wife he couldn't afford. "I told him we were a little tight on cash after the wedding and the honeymoon. I asked for a little grace period. And he exploded. He threw a binder of receipts in my face and told us we were cut off." Susan gasped, bringing a hand to her pearl necklace. "Cut off, you mean?" "Entirely everything," Brittany confirmed. "The rent, the credit cards, the trust fund. He said the Bank of Bill is closed. He told us to get out of his house." There was a silence in the room, but it wasn't the sympathetic silence they were expecting. It was a cold, calculating silence. Robert lowered his glass. Susan sat up straighter, her eyes darting to her husband. Well, Robert said, clearing his throat. That is certainly unfortunate. Your father has always been a rather rigid man. Lacking in vision, exactly, Brittany said, leaning forward, her eyes shining with anticipation. That is why we came here. We told him we didn't need his charity. We told him that my parents would never let us end up on the street. We told him you were going to buy the penthouse. The air left the room instantly. It was as if someone had opened a window in a submarine. Robert choked on his scotch. He coughed violently, spilling amber liquid onto his silk lapel. Susan froze, her magazine slipping from her fingers. Buy the penthouse, Robert sputtered, wiping his mouth with a handkerchief. Who said anything about buying a penthouse? You did? Brittany said, her voice faltering slightly. You said it months ago. You said, why are you renting from that old miser? We should just buy you a place so you have equity. You said that, Dad. Remember, Robert's face turned a shade of red that matched the curtains. I was speaking hypothetically, Brittany. I was talking about market strategy. I wasn't making a formal offer of purchase. But we need you to do it now, Daniel pleaded. He stepped forward, his hands open. Look, Bill is serious. The eviction notice is on the door. If we don't buy the unit, we have to move out in 5 days. And my credit score will be ruined. We need a cash offer to shut him up. It is $2 million. That is nothing to you guys, right? Daniel looked at them with the eyes of a believer praying to a statue. He truly believed that $2 million was pocket change for Robert Miller. Robert stood up. He walked over to the fireplace, turning his back on them. He needed a moment. He needed a moment to construct a lie, because the truth was too humiliating to admit. $2 million is a significant allocation of capital, Robert said, his voice tight. Even for us. Our assets are currently illiquid. Illiquid, Brittany asked. What does that mean? It means the market is volatile, Robert snapped, turning around. His facade of the benevolent patriarch was cracking. It means my money is tied up in offshore accounts and long-term bonds. I cannot just snap my fingers and produce $2 million in cash because your father is having a temper tantrum, Susan chimed in, her voice shrill. And really, Daniel, why is this our responsibility? You are the husband. You are supposed to provide for our daughter. We assumed that when Brittany married you, she was marrying into stability. I am providing, Daniel stammered. I work hard. But Bill, he pulled the rug out. Then fix it. Robert yelled. The volume of his voice made everyone jump. Go back to your father and apologize. Get on your knees if you have to. But do not come into my house and demand that I liquidate my portfolio to clean up your mess. Daniel took a step back, stunned. He had never seen Robert lose his cool. This was the man who always tipped the valet $50. This was the man who bragged about his yacht club membership. But Dad, Brittany whined, standing up. We can't go back to Bill. We burned that bridge. We insulted him. We told him you were better than him. We can't go back. You have to help us. Just write a check. Or take out a loan against the house. This house is worth $5 million, right? Robert and Susan exchanged a look of pure panic. Taking out a loan against the house was impossible, because the house was already leveraged to the hilt. In fact, they were 3 months behind on their own mortgage. The only reason they hadn't been evicted yet was because Robert was a master at stalling the bank. Don't tell me how to manage my finances, Brittany, Robert roared. He was sweating now. The illusion was dissolving. And when the illusion dissolves, the narcissist attacks. He pointed a shaking finger at Daniel. This is your fault. I knew you were a mistake. I told Susan from the beginning. He drives a nice car, I said, but does he own it? And now we know. You are a fraud, Daniel. You have been parading around like a big shot on your father's dime. And now that the tap is turned off, you come running to me. You want to bleed me dry too? I am not a fraud, Daniel shouted back, finding a backbone for the first time, though it was driven by fear. You guys are the ones who flash money around. You bought a Porsche last month. It is a lease, Susan screamed. It is a corporate lease. Do you know nothing about business? God, you are useless. I thought you were going to take care of Brittany. I thought your father was the real deal. We let her marry you because we thought the Carter family had deep pockets. The words hung in the air. We let her marry you because we thought the Carter family had deep pockets. It was the naked truth, ugly and undeniable. Daniel looked at Susan, then at Robert, and finally at Brittany. Brittany wasn't defending him. She was looking at her parents with horror, not because they were cruel, but because they were broke. Wait, Brittany whispered. Are you saying? You don't have the money? I am saying, I am not going to throw my money into a sinking ship, Robert yelled, deflecting the question. You two are on your own. Figure it out. Get a job. Get 2 jobs. Move into a studio apartment. I don't care. But get out of my house and take your drama with you. I have investors coming over tomorrow, and I cannot have this negative energy in my living room. You are kicking us out? Brittany asked, tears streaming down her face. Her mascara was running, ruining the perfect face she showed the world. But Mom, we have nowhere to go. The penthouse is locked. Bill blocked us. Susan sat back down and picked up her magazine. Her hands were shaking, but she forced herself to look calm. She was retreating into denial. That sounds like a personal problem, darling. You are an adult. You wanted to be independent. Well, welcome to independence. Now please leave. I have a headache. Daniel stood there, paralyzed. The room spun. He looked at the crystal chandelier above his head and realized it was probably dusty. He looked at the scotch in Robert's hand and realized it was probably a cheap blend poured into an expensive decanter. He had traded a father who loved him enough to say no for a father-in-law who only loved him when he thought he was rich. He had left a house built on concrete for a house built on credit cards. Come on, Daniel said. His voice was hollow. Brittany didn't move. She was staring at her parents as if they were aliens. Mom, she whispered one last time. Susan didn't look up. Goodbye, Brittany. Close the door on your way out. Daniel grabbed Brittany's arm and dragged her out of the room. She was limp, stumbling in her heels. They walked back out through the grand foyer, past the lies, past the facade. They stepped out into the night air. It was cold. The wind cut through Daniel's thin jacket. They walked to the car in silence. The silver Mercedes looked different now. It didn't look like a symbol of status. It looked like a liability. It looked like another monthly payment they couldn't make. They got into the car. Daniel put the key in the ignition, but he didn't turn it. He just sat there, gripping the wheel, staring at the white pillars of the house that wasn't a home. He realized then that Bill was right. He had been investing in a mirage. He had treated his father like an ATM and his in-laws like gods. And now the ATM was closed and the gods were revealed to be beggars in silk robes. What do we do? Brittany whispered. Her voice was small, terrified. She sounded like a little girl. Daniel laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. We do what Bill said, he replied. We wake up. He started the car and drove away from the mansion. They had no destination. The penthouse was a crime scene of their own making. Bill's house was a fortress they had besieged and failed to conquer, and the Miller estate was a hollow shell. They were driving on a road to nowhere with a tank full of gas and a credit score that was plummeting by the second. And for the first time in his life, Daniel Carter realized that he was completely, utterly, and terrifyingly alone. The safety net was gone, and the ground was coming up fast. The 5-day notice expired at midnight on a Tuesday. The deadline did not make a sound. It did not explode like a bomb or ring like a bell. It simply arrived silent and absolute, turning the calendar page from a warning into a judgment. Inside the penthouse at 400 North Lake Shore Drive, the atmosphere was not one of frantic packing, but of paralyzed denial. Daniel and Brittany had spent the last few days in a state of catatonic shock. They had moved a few boxes, thrown some clothes into suitcases, but the vast majority of their life remained untouched. They were waiting for a miracle. They were waiting for the phone to ring. They were waiting for me to cave. They did not understand that the man who built skyscrapers knows that once a structural failure begins, gravity takes over, and gravity does not negotiate. At 8 o'clock in the morning, the heavy thud of a fist on the door shattered their silence. It was not the polite knock of a neighbor or the rhythmic tap of a delivery driver. It was the authoritative, demand-filled pounding of the Cook County Sheriff's Department. I was not there, but Mitchell had arranged for a representative from the property management team to be present to secure the unit. Through their reports, I know exactly how the final scene of their high society fantasy played out. Daniel opened the door. He was wearing the same clothes he had worn the day before. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face pale and unshaven. Behind him, the apartment looked like the aftermath of a party that had gone on too long. "Good morning," the lead marshal said. He was a different man than Frank, the process server. This man was wearing a tactical vest and a badge that caught the morning light. "I have a writ of possession for this property. The time to vacate has expired. You have 10 minutes to collect your personal essentials and exit the premises." 10 minutes, Brittany's voice shrieked from the hallway. She rushed forward, clutching a Louis Vuitton handbag as if it contained the nuclear codes. "You cannot be serious. We have rights. We are tenants. You have to give us 30 days to move our things. We have furniture. We have art. We have a life here." The marshal did not raise his voice. He did not engage in a debate. He simply held up a clipboard. "Ma'am, you were served 5 days ago. You were given ample time to arrange for movers. The court order is immediate. Anything left in the unit after you step out, that door will be considered abandoned property or moved to storage at your expense subject to a lien for unpaid rent. But we can't move a sofa in 10 minutes. Brittany screamed, tears streaming down her face, ruining the layer of foundation she had applied to face the world. "Daniel, do something. Tell him." Daniel looked at the marshal, then at the floor. He knew there was nothing to say. He knew because he had Googled eviction laws all night, hoping for a loophole that didn't exist. "We need to go, Brittany," Daniel said, his voice a broken whisper. "Just grab the jewelry. Grab the laptops." "No," Brittany yelled. She ran back into the living room. She grabbed the cushions of the Italian leather sectional sofa. "This is mine. I picked this out. It is a custom color. We are taking it. Daniel, help me lift it." She tried to heave the heavy furniture, her heels slipping on the polished hardwood floor. It was a pathetic sight. A woman trying to drag a $5,000 sofa out the door, while law enforcement watched with crossed arms. The property manager stepped forward then. He was a young man named David holding a tablet with a detailed inventory list. "Excuse me, Mrs. Carter," David said politely. "I am afraid you cannot remove that sofa." Brittany dropped the cushion, breathing hard. "Excuse me, it is my furniture." David tapped his screen. "Actually, according to the receipts provided by the owner, William Carter, this sofa was purchased on September 12, 2022, using a credit card ending in 4592. That card is registered to Mr. Carter. Therefore, the sofa is the property of the landlord." Brittany stared at him. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She spun around, pointing at the 85-inch television mounted on the wall. "What about the TV? We watched movies on that. That is ours." David scrolled down his list. Samsung QLED purchased November 1st. Invoice number 773. Paid for by William Carter. That stays. Brittany ran to the dining room, the table, the crystal chandelier. "Property of the landlord. David recited, his voice calm and devastating. She ran to the kitchen. The espresso machine. The Vitamix blender. Landlord. Landlord. Brittany stood in the center of the living room, spinning in a slow circle. She looked at the rugs, the lamps, the curtains, the decorative vases. She realized with a dawning horror that she owned almost nothing. Her entire environment, the stage upon which she had built her influencer persona, was a set borrowed from a man she had called cheap. She had mocked my flannel shirts, yet she was standing on my rug under my lights trying to steal my sofa. "You are stripping us," she whispered. "You are taking everything." "We are securing the owner's assets," the marshal said, checking his watch. "You have 4 minutes remaining. I suggest you focus on your clothing and toiletries." Daniel grabbed 2 large suitcases from the closet. He began throwing things into them indiscriminately. A pile of designer hoodies, Brittany's makeup bag, a few pairs of shoes. He moved with the frantic energy of a looting victim, except he was looting his own life. Brittany just stood there sobbing. It wasn't the cry of a person who is sad. It was the wail of a person who is being erased. Without the backdrop of the penthouse, without the props of wealth, who was she? Just a girl from the suburbs with a maxed-out credit card and a mean streak. "Time is up," the marshal announced. Daniel zipped the bags shut. He grabbed Brittany's arm. "Come on, Britt. We have to go." She resisted for a moment, gripping the doorframe of the bedroom. "No, please," she begged, looking at the marshal. "Just one more day. Please. My parents will send money. My husband will get a bonus. We are good people. We don't belong on the street." The marshal gently but firmly peeled her fingers from the wood. "Ma'am, you need to step into the hallway, now." They walked out. The door clicked shut behind them. The sound of the lock turning was final. The marshal applied a heavy padlock to the latch and slapped a new sticker on the wood. Possession returned to owner. They stood in the hallway with 3 suitcases and a garment bag. The neighbors from 42A were coming out of their apartment. It was a couple Daniel and Brittany had tried desperately to impress a pair of successful architects. They looked at the bags. They looked at the padlock. They looked at Brittany's tear-streaked face. They didn't say hello. They simply pressed the elevator button and looked at the ceiling, pretending not to see the social execution happening 3 feet away. The elevator ride down was silent. When the doors opened in the lobby, Hector the doorman was standing at his post. Hector, who had once carried their bags and parked their cars. "Hector," Daniel said, his voice cracking. Can you help us with these bags? We need to get a cab." Hector looked at them. He looked at the suitcases that screamed eviction. He remembered the way Brittany had snapped at him last week for not opening the door fast enough. He remembered the way Daniel never looked him in the eye. "I am sorry." "Mr. Carter," Hector said, his voice flat. "I am only authorized to assist residents of the building." He turned his back and picked up the phone to call a maintenance worker. They pushed their own heavy bags through the revolving doors. Chicago is a beautiful city, but in late November it has teeth. The moment they stepped onto the sidewalk, the weather hit them. It wasn't snowing yet, but the sky was a bruised purple, and the air was filled with freezing sleet that stung the skin like needles. The wind whipped off the lake, cutting through Daniel's thin jacket and Brittany's silk blouse. They shivered, huddled together on the curb, surrounded by the towering glass giants of the city. Daniel pulled out his phone to call an Uber. He opened the app. He typed in the destination of a nearby hotel. He hit request. The screen spun for a moment, then flashed a red error message. Payment declined. He tried another card. Declined. He tried the emergency credit card I had given him, the one I had frozen 3 days ago. Declined. He looked at Brittany. She was hugging herself, her teeth chattering, her hair already plastered to her skull by the freezing rain. "It isn't working," Daniel whispered. "The cards aren't working." Brittany looked up at the building they had just been kicked out of. High above on the 42nd floor, the lights were off. The heat was on. The furniture was safe, bassoon. But they were down here on the gray concrete with the rest of the world. A city bus roared past, splashing dirty slush onto Brittany's legs. She didn't even scream. She just stared at the mud on her boots, too broken to care. For years, they had looked down on people. They had looked down on me. They had looked down on service workers. Now they were at the bottom, looking up, and the view was terrifying. "There is a motel," Daniel said, wiping the sleet from his eyes. "On the outskirts, near the airport. It is cheap. We can take the train." "The train," Brittany whispered. "The public train." "It is that or the sidewalk, Britt." Daniel snapped his patience, finally snapping under the cold weight of reality. He grabbed the handles of the suitcases. The wheels rattled loudly on the uneven pavement as they began to walk toward the subway station. It was a long walk. The sleet fell harder, turning into wet snow that clung to their eyelashes and froze in their hair. They walked past a coffee shop where they used to buy $7 lattes. They walked past the boutique where Brittany bought her dresses. They were ghosts in their own life, invisible and unwanted. As they descended the stairs into the subway, leaving the world of light and sky for the underground darkness, Daniel looked back one last time. He saw a man in a Ford F-150 stopped at the traffic light. For a heart-stopping second, he thought it was me. He took a step forward, ready to wave, ready to beg, but the light turned green and the truck drove away. It wasn't me. I was miles away, sitting in a warm office, reading a text message from Mitchell. Possession secured. Tenants vacated. Locks changed. I put the phone down. I watched the snow falling outside my window. I knew it was cold out there. I knew they were freezing. But I also knew that warmth is something you have to build log by log, brick by brick. You cannot steal warmth, and you cannot inherit it if you burn the house down. They were in the cold now, and for the first time in their lives they would have to figure out how to make their own fire. The morning after the eviction, the city of Chicago was wrapped in a blanket of gray fog. From the 71st floor of the Sterling Tower, the cars down on the street looked like slow-moving beetles navigating a concrete maze. I sat in my high-back leather chair facing the floor-to-ceiling windows, my back to the heavy oak door of my office. I was drinking black coffee and waiting. I knew he would come. Desperation has a way of leading people to the highest point they can find, hoping that the view from the top offers some kind of clarity or mercy. I had instructed the front desk to let him up. I told them that Mr. Daniel Carter had an appointment with the chairman. I did not tell them he was my son. To the staff, he was just another petitioner, another young man in a cheap suit looking for a loan or a lease extension. At 10 o'clock sharp, my intercom buzzed. It was Sarah, my executive assistant. "Mr. Carter is here," she said. Her voice was professional, but I could hear a hint of hesitation. "He looks distressed. Should I send him in?" "Send him in," I said. And Sarah, "Yes, sir, close the door behind him. I do not want to be disturbed." I heard the heavy click of the electronic lock disengaging. I heard the door open. I did not turn around. I kept my gaze fixed on the skyline, on the jagged rows of buildings that I had helped shape over the last 40 years. "Hello?" Daniel's voice was tentative. It lacked the arrogance of the boy who had demanded rent money a week ago. It lacked the confidence of the husband who had bragged about his exclusive wedding. It was the voice of a man who had spent the night in a motel room listening to his wife cry. I waited a beat before speaking. I let the silence of the room press down on him. This office was designed to intimidate. The ceilings were 20 feet high. The carpet was thick enough to swallow footsteps. The air smelled of old paper and power. "Please take a seat," I said. I kept my voice low, modulating it so it sounded familiar, yet distant. I heard him shuffle across the room. I heard the creak of the guest chair as he sat down. I could practically smell his anxiety. It smelled like stale coffee and fear. "Thank you for seeing me, sir," Daniel began. He was rehearsing a speech. I could tell. He had probably practiced it in the elevator. "I know you are a busy man. I know Carter Holdings is a massive entity. But I am here to appeal to your humanity." I took a sip of my coffee. Humanity. A rich word from a boy who had treated his father like a servant. "Go on," I said. "My name is Daniel Carter." He continued, his voice gaining a little strength. "I was a tenant at your North Lake Shore property, Unit 42B. There was a misunderstanding regarding the rent. My financial backer pulled out unexpectedly. It was a personal family dispute that spiraled out of control. He was calling me a financial backer. He was reducing 28 years of fatherhood to a failed transaction. "I see," I said to the window. "And you want what exactly?" "I want a reinstatement of the lease," Daniel said quickly. "I want a chance to make it right. Look, I am an influencer. My wife has a significant following. We bring value to the building just by living there. We are trendsetters. If you let us move back in, we can work out a payment plan. I am about to close a big deal. I just need time. I just need someone to believe in my potential." I closed my eyes. He was still doing it. He was still selling the sizzle when he didn't have the steak. He was talking about value and potential while wearing a shirt that hadn't been ironed. "You speak of potential, Mr. Carter," I said. "But my legal team tells me you have no assets. They tell me your credit score has dropped 50 points in the last week. They tell me you were evicted for non-payment and refusal to vacate. In the world of commercial real estate, those are not the markers of potential. Those are the markers of a liability." Daniel shifted in his chair. "I know how it looks on paper, sir. But that is why I wanted to meet the chairman. I heard you are a visionary. I heard you take risks on people. I am asking you to look past the numbers. I am asking you to see the man." I smiled. A sad, tired smile. "You want me to see the man?" I repeated. "Yes," Daniel pleaded. "I am a hard worker. I am loyal. I just had a run of bad luck with my father. He is a difficult man. He is old and bitter, and he cut me off to prove a point. But I am not him. I am going to build something of my own. I just need a foundation." He was going to build something of his own. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. I placed my coffee cup on the windowsill. "You are right about one thing, Daniel," I said. "You need a foundation. But a foundation cannot be built on lies, and it certainly cannot be built on the charity of strangers." I pressed the button on the armrest of my chair. The hydraulic mechanism hummed softly. Slowly, deliberately, the massive leather chair began to rotate. The city view slid away. The mahogany desk came into view. And finally I faced him. Daniel was leaning forward, his hands clasped in a gesture of prayer. When he saw my face, the color drained from his skin so fast, it looked like he had been struck by lightning. He didn't speak. He couldn't. His mouth hung open. His eyes bulged. He looked around the office at the awards on the wall, at the photos of me shaking hands with mayors and governors, and then back at me. "Dad," he whispered. It came out as a squeak. "Hello, Daniel," I said. He stood up, stumbling back, knocking the chair over. What are you doing here?" "This is the chairman's office. Where is the owner? Where is Mr. Henderson?" "There is no Mr. Henderson," I said, resting my hands on the desk. "There never was." Daniel shook his head, trying to process the impossibility of it. "But, Carter Holdings, you are just an engineer. You inspect bridges. You drive a Ford truck." "I am a structural engineer, Daniel," I corrected him. "And 40 years ago I realized that the best way to ensure a building stands forever is to own the ground it sits on." I stood up. I walked around the desk. I didn't look like a retiree anymore. In this room, surrounded by the empire I had built, I looked like what I was. A titan. I founded Carter Holdings in 1985. I said, walking toward him. I named it Carter because I wanted it to be a legacy for my family. For you, me, Daniel breathed. Yes, I said. Every building I bought, every deal I closed, I did it thinking that one day I would hand the keys to my son. I hid the wealth because I wanted you to learn the value of $1. I wanted you to be tough. I wanted you to be kind. I wanted you to be the kind of man who treats a janitor with the same respect as a CEO. I stopped 3 feet from him. But I failed, didn't I? I asked. Daniel looked down at his shoes. Dad, I didn't know if I had known. If you had known, you would have been worse. I cut him off. You would have been waiting for me to die. You would have been spending money you didn't earn. He looked up, tears in his eyes. Dad, please. I am sorry. I was stupid. Brittany, she pushed me. But we can fix this. You own the building. That is amazing. We can move back in. We can tell everyone it was a misunderstanding. I can work for you. I wrote that email. Remember, I have vision. We can run this together. He was doing it again. He was pivoting. He was trying to find the angle. He saw the power in the room, and he wanted a piece of it. He wasn't apologizing for the pain he caused. He was apologizing because he got caught betting against the house. I looked at him, and I felt the final door close in my heart. It wasn't out of anger. It was out of necessity. No, Daniel, I said. What, he blinked. I said no. You cannot move back in. You cannot work here. But why? You are the chairman. You can do whatever you want. I walked over to the wall where a framed blueprint hung. It was the original schematic for the North Lake Shore Tower. I pointed to the date in the corner. 1998. I didn't buy that building, Daniel. I said, my voice resonating in the quiet room. I built it. I poured the concrete for the foundation while you were still in diapers. I spent nights sleeping in my truck on that construction site to make sure the steel arrived on time. I risked everything I had to put that tower in the sky. I turned back to him. I built it to house people who value their home. I built it for people who pay their debts. I built it for people who have integrity. I walked back to my desk and pressed the intercom button. Sarah, please have security escort Mr. Carter from the building. Daniel's eyes went wide. Dad, no. You can't do this. Yeah, I am your son. I sat back down in my chair. I looked at him with a gaze that was entirely void of the father he used to manipulate. I am not acting as your father right now, Daniel. Right now, I am the chairman of Carter Holdings, and I am using my executive privilege to refuse service to a bad customer. The door opened. 2 security guards stepped in. They were large men, professional and silent. Please, Dad, Daniel shouted as they took him by the arms. Just give me a loan. Just $5,000. We have nowhere to go. I didn't answer. I didn't look away. I watched him being dragged out of the office, his heels dragging on the expensive carpet. When the door clicked shut, the silence returned. I picked up my coffee cup. It was cold, but I drank it anyway. I turned my chair back toward the window. The fog was lifting. I could see the city clearly now. It was a brutal city, cold and hard. But if you respected it, if you built your foundation deep enough, you could weather any storm. My son was out there in the storm now, and for the first time I wasn't going to hand him an umbrella. He would have to learn to enjoy the rain. The silence in the office after the security guards removed my son was heavy, but it was not empty. It was filled with the kind of finality that usually follows a funeral. I sat there for a long time watching the dust motes dance in the shaft of sunlight that cut across my desk. I was not mourning the loss of a son because I had lost him long ago to greed and vanity. I was mourning the hope that he might one day find his way back. But hope, like a bad investment, must eventually be written off. I pressed the intercom button one last time. "Sarah," I said, "please come in." She entered quietly holding a notepad. She didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with the respect due to a captain who had just steered his ship through a hurricane. "Yes, Mr. Carter. I want you to issue a directive to the leasing department," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Add Daniel Carter and Brittany Carter to the corporate exclusion list. Classification Level 4. Sarah stopped writing. She looked up, her eyes widening slightly. "Level 4, that is the permanent blacklist, sir. That is usually reserved for tenants who burn down units or assault staff. It is shared with the National Tenant Network." "I know what it is," I said. "Do it. Cite significant financial risk and attempted extortion of management." "Yes, sir." I watched her write the note. It was a few strokes of a pen, but it was a death sentence for their lifestyle. The National Tenant Network is the database that every reputable landlord in the country checks. With a Level 4 flag from Carter Holdings, Daniel and Brittany would not just be barred from my buildings. They would be flagged by every luxury management company in Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles. Their credit scores, already damaged by the eviction, would now carry a scarlet letter that no amount of apologizing could erase. They wanted to live in a world of status. I had just revoked their passport. I stood up and put on my old canvas jacket. It was stained with paint from the railing I had finished yesterday. It looked out of place in the corner office, but it felt right on my shoulders. "I am done for the day, Sarah," I said. "I am going home." I took the elevator down to the garage, bypassing the lobby. I didn't want to see the marble floors or the brass fixtures. I wanted to see the dented dashboard of my Ford F-150. I wanted to hear the engine cough before it started. The drive home was peaceful. The city faded into the rearview mirror, replaced by the familiar rows of suburban houses, the oak trees, and the quiet dignity of a life built with hands, not loans. When I pulled into my driveway, another car was already there. It was a modest sedan. Mitchell was leaning against the hood, holding a six-pack of beer. Next to him was Frank, the process server, holding a bag of charcoal. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt on my face in weeks. "I thought you might need a drink," Mitchell said as I got out of the truck. "And I thought you might need help grilling," Frank added. "I heard you finally closed the biggest deal of your life." I laughed. It wasn't a bitter laugh. It was a release. "Yes," I said. "The deal is closed. The liability is off the books." We went into the backyard. We didn't talk about Daniel. We didn't talk about Brittany or the penthouse or the tears. We talked about baseball. We talked about the foundation repair on the library project. We talked about the best way to season a steak. I lit the grill. The smell of charcoal and lighter fluid filled the crisp evening air. It was a simple smell, an honest smell. It smelled like freedom. We sat on the patio furniture I had bought 10 years ago at a hardware store. It wasn't Italian leather. It didn't have a designer label. But it was comfortable. And the people sitting on it were real. Mitchell took a sip of his beer and looked at me. "You know, Bill," he said quietly, "most men wouldn't have had the strength to do what you did. Most men would have written the check just to stop the noise." I flipped a steak on the grill. The flames hissed. "Writing the check would have been the easy thing to do, Mitchell," I said. "But it would have been the cruelest thing, too. If I had bailed him out today, I would have been robbing him of his only chance to become a man. He thinks I ruined him. But maybe, just maybe, I saved him from a lifetime of being a parasite." Frank nodded. "My old man used to say that you never truly own a house until you fix the roof yourself in the rain. Your boy, he has never held a hammer in his life." He is holding one now, I said, looking up at the first stars appearing in the sky. It is called reality, and it is a heavy tool. We ate dinner under the moonlight. The steak was tough, the beer was cheap, and the conversation was rich. There was no pretense. No one was trying to impress anyone. We were just three men who knew the value of hard work, enjoying the fruits of our labor. As the night wound down and my friends left, I stood alone in my kitchen. I washed the dishes myself. I dried the blue ceramic plate that Martha had made, the one Brittany had called clutter. I placed it back in the cabinet, right in the front, where I could see it every day. I walked into the living room and sat in my favorite armchair. The house was quiet. For the first time in 18 months, the silence wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. The phone wasn't ringing. There were no demands, no insults, no emotional blackmail. I thought about Daniel and Brittany. I knew where they were. Mitchell had told me. They were at a Motel 6 near the airport, charging the room to a credit card that was about to hit its limit. They were blaming me. They were blaming the world. They were probably still posting on social media trying to spin a story of victimhood. But stories don't pay the rent. I picked up a photo frame from the side table. It was a picture of me and Daniel when he was 5 years old. We were building a sandcastle on the beach. He was looking at me with total trust, waiting for me to show him how to make the walls stand up. I touched the glass. "I am still showing you, son," I whispered. "I am showing you that walls don't stand up because you wish them to. They stand up because you build them straight." I put the photo down. To everyone watching this, I want to leave you with one thought. We live in a world that is obsessed with image. We filter our faces, we lease our lifestyles, and we treat relationships like transactions. But the currency of a good life is not money. It is not fame. It is character. The true value of a person is not measured by how they treat the people who can do something for them. It is measured by how they treat the people who are no longer useful to them. My son and his wife failed that test. They looked at a father and saw an ATM. They looked at a home and saw a backdrop. They looked at love and saw leverage. Don't make that mistake. Build your life on the bedrock of respect. Pay your own way. And never ever underestimate the man in the flannel shirt. He might just own the building you are standing in. My name is Bill Carter. I am a structural engineer, and my house is finally in order. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to make a hard choice to protect your dignity, let me know in the comments. And remember to subscribe for more stories about justice, resilience, and the power of the truth.